What have your patients been telling you about just what they're going through at the moment and just what they're struggling with right now?
Look, for most of my patients, COVID-19 crisis is not just a medical crisis. It's a psychological crisis, one where there's a loss of a self as well. So as much as they're losing loved ones, they are losing their sense of self, because now it's not an individual grief, it's a collective grief. So they are grieving not just family members, but they're grieving a way of life, a way of normalcy that they used to. So for them, it's a multitude of things that is going on at the moment. So they're not in isolation, just dealing with a loved one being lost. They're dealing with a complicated grief at present.
And what particularly, though, are their struggles, especially when it comes to, the sudden loss of somebody? We're hearing more and more about people who are generally healthy, haven't been sick for long, seem to be on the mend even if they end up in hospital, and then suddenly the worst happens. How are people coping with that?
People are finding it very challenging because they're not being able to have face-to-face contact. They are not having that intimate connection with the individual. So almost the feeling is surreal. And that feeling of surreal means that individuals aren't able to fully conceptualize what is really going on and how to process this disconnection from a loved one. And in order for them to be able to understand the process and the stages of grieving, they must be able to understand it from an objective point of view. So people are feeling very disconnected at present, which is leading to anxiety, leading to depression, leading to individuals having a constant state of sadness and unhappiness.
Take us through, you mentioned the stages of grief. There are various stages. Take us through ordinarily what the stages of grief would be and how that has changed, if it has changed, in the time of COVID-19.
This, according to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, there's 5 stages of grief, and I think this is the 5 stages that most individuals are accustomed to. However, there's a 6th concept that has come up, which I'll explain to you just now. So the first one is denial, is that feeling of surreal and not knowing and not accepting that this has happened, because you haven't seen it firsthand and you hear about it, then you're in denial that it isn't happening. So that's the first stage. The second stage is anger, is getting angry as to why me, why I have to suffer, what's going on, why is it my family that has to be this? And I mean, it sounds like a very selfish thing to do, but each individual is now looking at their own homestead and looking at, why does this have to happen to me? Even though you are watching on social media so many different funerals that are taking place, families are losing loved ones, more than one loved one. So individuals are becoming selfish and asking why. So they're angry about that. They're angry at government. They're angry at the universe as a collective thing. Then it's about bargaining. Is that did we do something? Could we have done anything different? Did we maintain all our protocols? And so it's like, if I did this, do you think that the bargaining with God is like, I did all of this, and why did this happen? So you kind of like looking at a higher power bargaining here that's happening. Then the state of like now where you're coming to that close of acceptance, but it's that depressed state of trying to understand and going into that shell and understanding what is actually happening and cocooning yourself and trying to make sense of all of it. And that stage can take quite a long time to come out of, especially if you don't have the social support that you have, that is around you. And generally, when you lose somebody, you have a lot of social support. People are around you all the time, providing you with the comfort that you need and the compassion that you need. And now we are disconnected from people. Funerals and grieving homes are now very empty. And so individuals are now taking longer to come out of the depressed state. And then the 5th stage is the final of acceptance. And the acceptance stage comes with a lot of baggage as well, because now you can't actually do the things that you need to do. You can't touch your loved one. You can't kiss them. You can't say goodbye. You can't see them in those last stages that they are entering if it's a cremation. entering into that furnace, you can't go through those stages and those processes and those steps, so it leaves you feeling empty. And that sense of acceptance is now leading to your sixth stage. With Kessler has said that there's a sixth stage that we need to include, especially during this time of COVID, and it's about finding meaning and finding meaning through all of this, because in the end of it, we are now attaching to the only thing that's left, and that is love, and that love never dies. And so in order to be able to find meaning and to get to that last stage, you have to be able to draw on those feelings of love that you have for the person that has passed on. And that's when you can actually find some sort of understanding of what has happened.
And Akashni, you speak of, the support that one usually gets when you lose someone ordinarily, and just going through the process and the coping mechanisms that we usually have. A lot of that is dependent on rituals that many of us perform as well. I mean, as a Hindu, you would know we also have many days of prayer. We have many days where we sit together, where it kind of is comforting, yes, to have those people, but to do those things, even if we don't understand them, but they bring us some comfort. Now, we aren't able to do that as well. And like you say, instead we are now looking for something to blame for why we find ourselves being on the other side of this loss as well. So how do we change our mindsets that we are not dependent on those rituals, that we can start to maybe create rituals of our own that will bring us something close to that comfort we would have experienced?
I have to add here that I have been watching quite a few, funerals that have been online, and most of the people, the rituals, they're adapting it. And, that is such a wonderful way of reframing what you used to do and doing it in a very different way. So it's giving a small sense of comfort, to the rituals that is performing. However, I think in order for us to be able to understand the process, we need to be able to put in new things. We need to be able to adapt and introduce new ways of legalizing these, our love for our loved ones. So you can do a ritual over social media. You could actually have these ceremonies where you invite and you have different people, log in from different places all over the world, and have it as a collective thing, and where you can also engage with individuals to send important messages. And also I've seen on one particular post of a friend of mine, his children have memorialized him in such a way that they got all his colleagues, all his family members to send their relationship with that individual. So what happens is that it's not the same as the rituals, but it's a different type of ritual that is creating some sort of legacy for the loved ones that has passed on. And it's a small comfort. However, in a time like this, we have to adapt our way of being.
And, I've heard in the past 2 weeks, I've received at least 3 messages in less than a week of someone I know who has passed on this week alone, 3 relatives in one day. How does somebody deal with multiple deaths like that? How does somebody even begin? Where do you begin to grieve? Especially some families have had close members, very close members, pass on in a short space of time in this time. How do you begin to even, process that?
Look, this is a complicated grief, and I'm not going to say it's going to be easy. I'll be lying and I'll be saying you can't actually process it in a way that is normal, like how you would. So I would think that individuals grieve. It's like a fingerprint. Each individual grieves very differently, and we got to figure out what works for that family, what works for that individual. And family members of that individual need to give them as much support as possible, but also not ask them to get over it, not ask them to get past it and to move on. It's about moving through and processing within to be able to understand what they are feeling, to listen, to be there, to be present, because that's what the grieving party needs, is somebody to be present. So it's an individual process, and I would suggest that family members need to give them as much support as they can, check in with them, send them messages every day, and don't ask, how you're feeling, just ask, what do you need today? And if it's become very difficult to cope and those 5 stages and individuals are stuck, I would suggest, reach out for counseling. There's online counseling provided almost every single place. Every counselor is now doing online, and there's free support groups. At least, hook up with something like that so that you can get through this with as much support as possible.
The other thing is people who are not here, who live abroad, who are not here for their loved ones. Some people make phone calls once a week. The person may have passed on before they touch base one more time, or had a chance to sort of just talk about their feelings. Or how does one deal with that when you have a sister or a mum who is abroad and has passed away, or you are abroad and they are here with the rest of the family? Is that a different process?
It is a different process, and there in itself is that there's different factors that come into play there. It's especially since that it depends on the last time that individual has made contact with their loved ones, and so that process of grief is very different. Their needs are going to be different. So what they require for therapy, or what they would require in order for them to process the grief, would be very individualistic. So, but I would still think that they would need the support. They would still need. With online now, we can do anything. We can reach out to anybody across the world, to connect with them and give them the same kind of support that we would give with somebody that's actually just, living next door to us.
And you spoke earlier of the collective grief, and for example, somebody who has lost someone or several people might feel, for want of a better term, part of a community at the moment, Akashni, to say, yes, I'm not the only one going through all of this. We're all in this together. Everyone, there are millions around the world who are going through this, which in some way might make it, for now, a bit more acceptable. But what happens if and when things kind of return to normal, when the vaccine gets to our shores and people are surviving this? Are we to expect then that loss is going to hit us, or hit those people later? It's going to hit them harder, because now they feel part of a collective. But later, when life goes back to normal and you feel this loss more than what you're feeling it now, what can we expect to happen then? Is that something that we can expect to happen?
Yeah, that's now going to be an anticipatory grief. So we're going to have to deal with that situation as and when it comes in, because then the needs of that time is going to be very different from what it is now. So the approaches that we're going to look at that point is going to be very different in terms of management and how we actually collectively handle that trauma and that grief. Because remember, each stage that we're going through, so as we went through the different stages of lockdown, we also went through different emotions and different anxieties. So we are going to have to look at it in a different way. We can't, what works now may not necessarily work then, and we're going to have to adapt accordingly.
And in terms of, we often say, yes, closure, we need closure. Closure comes at some point. You may not get over the grief, but closure and acceptance comes at some point. At what point would somebody realize, I'm in trouble, I'm battling, and I need to talk to somebody like Akashni because I can't get through this on my own? What might they be feeling?
If you put yourself in a cocoon and you feel like you can't come out of it, and the family members around you can't reach you, then it's time for you to take action. And family members need to refer that individual for counseling, because once you get into a cocoon, you're withdrawing yourself and you're now only with your thoughts, and that is a sign of danger. And those individuals can become suicidal. And I would suggest that, family members need to make sure that they are keeping a close eye on the person that's grieving, because every stage, as we said, individual is like a fingerprint. Their grief is like a fingerprint. Each individual is going to grieve differently. So you've got to monitor, you've got to make sure that you're hand-holding them in every step of the way. And when you find that you can't reach them anymore and they're not listening to you, they can't hear you, that's the time where you have, before it gets to that serious point, if you see the signs building up to that, you need to stop and you need to say, you know what, we need to get at least some sort of that assistance. Bring some, family members online, do an intervention, and if that intervention's not working, you need to engage a counselor, psychologist to be able to reach that individual.
And just on that note then, before I let you go, Akashni, the other side of the coin is people allowing themselves to grieve. We might not allow, a lot of people are like that. So I think also just a final word from you on allowing yourself to go through the motions. Sometimes we feel like we have to keep it together.
Look, I'm very big on this. It's so important for each individual to grieve, to process, to understand, to know what's going on. Don't try to get through it. Don't try to push through it and to to be brave and to show the world that I'm strong. If you need to grieve, if you need to cry, remember, grieving is a roller coaster ride. Today you're going to be okay. Tomorrow you might be happy. So you need to be able to accept and process those waves of emotions as it's coming, and don't allow anybody to tell you anything otherwise, to say that you need to not feel this particular way. You need to be able to be understood, because we are not dealing with just any normal grief. We are dealing with an individual who has lost a loved one, and a loved one cannot be forgotten. A loved one cannot be put in the back burner, cannot be suppressed. You have to acknowledge, you have to make sure that that love is staying there, and it is legalized in such a way that the person is able, once all of this is over, to be able to know that I've grieved properly. I've honored this particular individual, and I haven't just suppressed it and moved on because people are saying I should.
All right, Akashni Maharaj, thank you so much for that, and definitely many people need to repeat that to themselves. Allow yourself, be kind to yourself in this time of grief. Still to come on the Health Focus, COVID-19 no longer just taking individuals, but as we're hearing more and more, it's also wiping out families. More on the impact of this virus in South Africa when we come back.